Okay, hey guys. I have my Google Doc open and I'm ready to get started working on my Kehinde Wiley inspired portrait. First thing that I want to just double check is that my name and the title of the assignment that we're working on is in the title of my artwork. This is going to make it easy to find later on. Okay, so that has my name and then the assignment that I'm working on. Okay, so if you remember what we were talking about in class, this gridded area is our picture space. Anything outside of that, so what's over here, is not going to be included in our saved picture. I'm going to right click and change the background color just to an orange, just so that it's a little bit easier for you guys to see what I'm working with and what I'm working on. So you don't have to change your background right now. You can wait to change until the end, but I'm just changing it now so that we can clearly see where my picture space begins and ends. Okay, so we are doing portraits, so we need to include a picture of a person, right? I am going to get started by inserting that picture that I want to use. If you remember, we said that we can use this tool right over here, the Insert Image tool. I'm going to click on the little caret, and we have a couple of different options. So if you have a picture that you have on your computer that you want to use, you can upload from the computer. You can search the web, or you could even do a self-portrait, right? And click on the camera and take a picture of yourself using the camera app directly in our Google Drawing. I'm going to search the web, and I'm going to do, the suggestion was Kehinde Wiley, so I'm going to do a picture of Kehinde Wiley. I think this was the one that I was using. So I click on the one that I want to use, and I hit Insert. And it's going to put that picture in there. So now what I want to do, this part is going to help set up the rest of my assignment. So it's important that I kind of pay attention and make sure that my placement is good now. I want to make sure that my picture is really big and takes up most of my picture space, so this orange background. Because the bigger that our picture is, the easier it is going to be to work on making our portrait. So you're going to notice if I click and drag on one side, it kind of makes it look stretched out, and I don't really like that, so I'm actually going to hit the undo button. And then if I click and drag from the top or the bottom, it also kind of makes it look stretched out. So I don't really want that to be the case with my portrait. I want to move everything in proportion, so that means that the sides and the top are moving at the same time. So what I'm actually going to do is, instead of clicking on a side or the top or the bottom, I'm going to click on one of the corners. So 1, 2, 3, or 4. And I'm just going to click and drag. And that moves it in proportion to it, so it doesn't look stretched out. That's really important to me, and I think a lot of you guys were also kind of like, why is my picture looking all stretched out? So that's one way to prevent that from happening. I'm going to click and drag to make this bigger, and I want my picture, sorry guys, something's caught in my throat. I want to make sure that my picture is nice and big, and I have a lot of big details to kind of work with. So I can even make this a little bit bigger. And anything that's outside of my picture space, so this bottom part of the picture, is going to get cut off. And I'm going to show you a tip to just make that a little bit easier to understand too. Okay, so I think that this is almost big enough, and I want my portrait to be kind of in the center. So if you see when I'm moving it around, there's that red line. That means that my picture is centered. So I can use that as a trick to help me place this. I think I'm actually going to move it off center a little bit because I am going to add some shoulder over here. Okay, a little bit, and then I think that is looking good. So this is exactly where my portrait is going to be on my final artwork, and this is the exact same size that it's going to be on my final artwork. Now I'm going to double click on this picture, and you're going to see that it brings up these like little black lines in the corners and along the side. That's the crop tool. So I'm going to crop it just to get rid of what isn't going to be included in my picture space. So I'm getting rid of that, and I hit the enter key, and that's just going to help me not be confused about like adding details that wouldn't be in my picture space. Okay, I am ready to get started now. So my portrait is placed, it's looking good, it's nice and big, it's where I want it to be. I'm ready to get started. So the first thing that I want to do is I'm actually going to hit this magnifying button. I'm going to click on that, and I'm going to zoom in. So I want his head to take up, you know, a nice big part of my screen so that it's easier for me to work with. I could even zoom in one more time if I wanted to. I'm gonna, I think, zoom out once just so it's easier for you guys to see exactly what I'm doing. So I zoomed in, and now I'm going to work on creating the outline or following the contour of his head. Okay, so what I'm going to do is I'm going to change to from the regular line tool to the polyline tool. And I'm going to pick anywhere on his face to get started. Click here, and I'm going to click once and then drag where I want it to go. Okay, so if I want to follow along his neck, I'm going up here, and then I click once more. If I click twice, it finishes that line, and that's not the shape that I want. So I'm actually going to hit the undo button to undo that. I'm going to try again. So click once, and then drag, and then I'm just going to follow along the contour or the outside line of, oops, I double clicked there, so that ended that, and then that means I gotta try again. Okay, one more time. So it may take a couple of tries, and that's perfectly okay. It is also okay if it's not perfect the first time. I will show you how we can change where some of the points are at the end. You can see I'm doing kind of like medium-sized lines, and that way I think if the lines are too big, then it looks really sharp and kind of weird, and then if the lines are too short, you end up double clicking a lot and it can get really frustrating. So medium-sized lines are definitely the way to go with this assignment. Okay, so I'm gonna come down here, follow along with this, follow along here, follow along here. Okay. There we go. Cool. And I clicked where I started to close that shape. So now I have this funny blue shape over his face. I don't want him to be blue, so I'm going to actually change that color. And in order to change the color, I'm going to click on this fill color. I had picked out, I thought it was this color. Yeah, this color before for his skin tone, so I'm going to go with that. I'm changing the fill color and the border color to be the same. Okay, and then there we go. So that's kind of the outside, that's the shape of his head. If you zoom in, you can see maybe I missed a little bit of his ear here. So if I wanted to fix that up a little bit more, what I can actually do is I can click on the select tool, click on the shape you want to change, and then double click. And you're going to see that it changes from that blue box to these purple dots. And you can actually click and drag those to change the shape. So after you have made your shape, there are ways that we can work on editing it. So maybe I want to bring this out a tiny bit like that. And we can kind of fine tune them and move them. I mean, if I made like a huge mistake, like something like that, I can fix it later by bringing it over here. I'm kind of adjusting it to better fit the picture that we're working on. Okay, I'm going to zoom back out now, and the next thing that I'm going to start working on is working on the outline of his outfit, right? So this like shirt and then this really interesting ornate, I'll say, jacket. Okay, so I'm going to go back to the polyline tool, or actually before I do that, I'm going to zoom in so that I have a nice view of his clothing, and I'm going to change to the polyline tool, and I'm just going to do the same thing that I did before and follow along the outside line. So I'll start over here. I'm going to have to kind of imagine what his shoulder looks like because I don't want it to look like it got cut off, but I'll just walk you through that step in a second. So I'm just clicking and dragging, click and drag, click and drag. What I could do over here is I could follow along there, or because we can change the order of the shapes, I'm actually just going to cut across. So I'm not following along all these little tiny details. I'm cutting across and going down. And I'll show you exactly how we'll make that work. Once oops, I messed up. I gotta undo and redo that. Okay, so I'm gonna start over here actually. So start up here, follow along the contour or the outside line, and then I know that this is going to intersect with a shape that already exists, so I'm actually just gonna drag it all the way across that shape. And then come down. Boop. And then this is where I messed up before, so I gotta be careful. There we go. So I could even zoom in a little bit more, and that would help me get all of those fine details there a little bit better. Okay, so I'm following along the outside, following along the outside. I'm going to actually, oh, oops. Okay, so here I think is the bottom of my shape. So, oh, I messed up. Undo. Okay. One more time. I'm going to walk us through just this part where I cut across there again, and then I'm going to fast forward through this, and hopefully I don't mess it up again. Okay. Following along the outside. So remember, because these shapes intersect or they go over each other, overlap, I can just cut across that, like that, and we're not going to be able to see that later. So I'm just kind of making up where I think the points for his shoulder are going to be right now, and I can always come back and change that a little bit later. So if it looks kind of weird, I'm not going to get super worried about that right now. And then I'm just going to connect these back, and then I got that shape. And if I zoom out, one, we can see if my shoulder looks weird. Maybe not, we'll see. But I can always edit that later. You can see I kind of, the points at the bottom I want to bring down a little bit more, but I was having trouble with that when I was so zoomed in. So I'll just try to fix that in a little bit. But right now this shape is on top of his head. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to right click, and I'm going to hit order, and I'm going to hit this one that says send backward. Send backward sends it back one layer. And send to back sends it all the way to the back. So it's kind of like a layer cake. I think I was talking about that before. Or a sandwich. So like what's at the bottom, what's in the middle, what's on the top. So if I send backward, I can see that his head now sits on top of the shirt that I created, right? And I can change the color, and that is actually that wasn't what I meant to do. That is actually looking pretty good so far. Okay, so there we go. Now what I can do too, now that I have his head and his body kind of finished, I can click on the picture in the background, and I'm actually going to move it over. So I'm going to move it over And it doesn't really matter if you move it to the left or the right, but what you want to do is you just want to have it somewhere where you can work on the details of his face and then click and drag and place them back onto the portrait. Okay? And I'll show you exactly what I mean by that. I'll start adding some details now. Yeah. Sorry, my brain is a little bit foggy. But okay. So I'm going to zoom in. Let's start working on his face. So like we did with the head, I'm going to work on big areas first. So bigger areas, like I can see we can do his hairline, we can do his mouth, maybe even his nose. And then I'm just going to do his mouth as one big shape, and then later on I can go in and add smaller shapes on top to kind of differentiate his lips from his teeth, right? Or even his different teeth from other teeth. It sounded weird, but I promise you'll see what I mean. So I am going to start with the outline of his hairline. And that is because that's going to help me to place the shapes that I have, or that I create. Because I know that his hairline is going to line up with the points that I made before at the top of his head, right? So that helps me to figure out where exactly that's going to go. So I'm going to click and drag and create his hairline. This is going to sit on top of the head that I drew. So I'm actually going to try to even be more careful this time than I was in making it look nice and neat and like smooth, because I want my points to be really sharp and clear. Okay. I don't want to mess up his hairline. Let's see. I feel like I kind of messed it up, but that's okay. Okay. There we go. So now we got a hairline there. I can always work on tweaking it in a little bit. And then, like I said, I'm going to also work on following the shape of his mouth. So I'm actually going to zoom in one more time because I'm working on such a small area that zooming in is going to be really helpful. I'm going to start in one corner and I'm going to just follow along what I see as the outside line of his mouth. So I'm just following along basically with the outside line of his lips. And it's going to make one big shape. But like I said before, we're going to go in and we're going to add in those smaller details after. So it's okay if that looks weird right now. Okay, so maybe I'll even do, I'll just leave it with that. Okay, so I'm going to hit this fit button that makes the picture fit perfectly. And now I have these two kind of funny blue shapes that are over that picture. So what I want to do is, it's really hard for me to just figure out where his mouth should go kind of freeform like this, right? I'm like, does it go here? Does it go there? Does it go? I could like eyeball it based on where it goes over here. But what I'm actually going to do is I'm going to use his hair to help me place it. I'm going to go back. I'm going to put that mouth back over his mouth. And I'm going to use the hair to help me place it. In order to do that, I'm going to click on the mouth, and I'm also going to hold down the shift button. So when I hold down the shift button, I can select multiple shapes, and I'm going to click on the hair. And that means that I'm moving both of these at the same time. I can also change both of the colors at the same time. I can change the border at the same time, so there's some funky looking lips and hair. But what's really important is that by holding that shift button and selecting two or more shapes, I can figure out exactly where I want to place his hair. I'm going to hit the zoom button and zoom in a little bit more. And then I'm going to select, these colors are like making it kind of hard. And I'm going to carefully kind of try to line up his hairline with the outside lines of his head that I created before. And that's going to help me place his mouth perfectly. So that looks like that's a little bit off. So I'm actually going to click. Okay. I'm going to change these colors to the colors that I actually wanted them to be so that it's also a little bit easier. And then I'm going to hit shift and then try and move them over a tiny bit. There we go. Let's see, is that better? Nope, I want to move it over a little bit more. So this part can take a little bit of time. You're going to just carefully move it over, and then I'm going to zoom out. And that's looking actually pretty good. So I have my hairline is ready, my lips are ready, my clothes are ready, and I'm just going to keep repeating that process basically until I have all of the details that I want to include in my picture. So maybe now I'm going to work on his eyebrows and maybe, what else could I do? Maybe I'll do his eyebrows, his eyes, and maybe the black part of his shirt. Okay. So I'm going to zoom in. I'm going to, I think, fast forward through how I copy those shapes exactly. But then once it comes time to moving them and editing them and tweaking them a little bit, I'll come back. Okay. Okay, so I know you may be saying, what in the world is going on with those eyes? They are looking super weird. So that part isn't going to be the entire part of the like white part of his eyes. I'm actually going to make that a skin tone and then build up his eyes on top of that. And we'll get there in a minute. Okay, so I did the shirt part, the black shirt, the black part of his shirt to help me figure out exactly where his eyes and his eyebrows should go. So I'm going to hit the select tool. I'm going to make sure that the shirt is selected. I'm going to hit shift, click on one eye, click on another eye. I know that they're selected because there's like a blue line around the shape. Click on the eyebrow and click on that eyebrow. And then I can just click on that and move it over to where I want it to be. And I am going to, I think, actually zoom in again. Oh my goodness, this is looking very funny. But that's okay. We're still working. It's not done yet. So I'm going to zoom in, and I can see exactly where I kind of want to line this up too. So I made that V point on the shirt to help me place it. So I'm going to select that, hit shift, move the eyes and the eyebrows, and then work on placing this a little bit more precisely. Like that's getting a little bit better. Okay, maybe even move it. Let's see what happens if we move it down. I think that that's good. And then I can adjust this shape by double clicking and then just kind of making sure that I cover up that part. There we go. Okay. So what I'm going to do now is I'm going to work on changing the color. So I'm going to change his eyebrows. I can select one eyebrow, select the other eyebrow. I can make those the same color that I made his hairline. There we go. And then I'm going to change his shirt to black. And then like I was saying, I want this part that's looking very funny right now to not be the white part of his eyes, but to actually be, I followed along kind of this darker skin tone area. So there's shadows in our eyes, and I'm going to make it look like those shadows by clicking on it, clicking on both of those, selecting this, and then this was the skin tone that I used to make the whole like base of his skin, and I'm going to actually use that to change the other color. So I click on custom, and then I can make it just a little bit darker based on that. There we go. Okay, so now let's change that up, and there we go. And it's still looking a little bit funny, but I promise it will come along and it's going to look awesome in the end. Um, I think that that's enough to get us started right now. And I'm just going to keep going in and doing that. So maybe I could keep on working on adding details around his lips. So like maybe I would add his teeth now. And I could place his teeth in his lips based on where his mouth is here, right? And I can then also add his nose while I'm working on his teeth and move those over at the same time and get that placement kind of perfect. I wouldn't stress too much about the colors right now because we can always tweak those a little bit later. Like I'm not super happy with this like teal turquoisey color. I'm going to change that up, I think. But yeah, I think that that's a good place to get started. We want to make sure that our shapes are big, that they're filling up that space, that there's no gaps in between them. And that's what's going to help to make us kind of make the most awesome portrait that we can. Yeah, I think I can't speak. I think that's it. I know you guys are going to rock this. And I'm really excited to see what we do.